Parents face many fears when it comes to raising their children, but being murdered by them is generally not one of them. For some unlucky few, this fear becomes a reality. Today's case features one such instance of unimaginable horror, but there are always three sides to every betrayal. The recollection of the victim or victims, the often unreliable narrative provided by the perpetrator, and finally, the actual facts. RACHAEL MULLENIX was born in Oklahoma City in 1989. She lived with her mother, Barbara, her father, Bruce, and her half-brother, Alex Haygood, who came from her mother's first marriage. RACHAEL made good grades and participated in multiple extracurriculars, including basketball, ballet, and gymnastics. Her upbringing was that of a normal child, until the age of 10, when things between her parents took a turn for the worse. Both her mother and her father developed drinking habits. Her mother, in particular, was described as a mean drunk who would often get physical with RACHAEL, pulling her hair and scratching her. However, there were never any police reports or charges filed. By the time she was 13, RACHAEL's parents had divorced. Her father moved to Corona for work, while Barbara took RACHAEL to Florida. However, she soon ran out of money to support them. RACHAEL's father then wanted her to move to California with him, but she refused to leave her mother behind, alone and homeless. Her father reluctantly agreed to let Barbara move in as well. So the two of them packed up what was left of their belongings and moved to Huntington Beach to be with Bruce. In what can only be described as an awkward living arrangement, the divorced Bruce and Barbara were living together as roommates, but they still fought like a married couple. During this time, Barbara's alcohol addiction had worsened. At the trial, Barbara was painted as a cold, mean, unpredictable person by RACHAEL and her father. However, a victim's advocate, Angela from the DA's office, read an interesting statement at the trial. It was in the small details. Barbara had often given RACHAEL the larger bedroom. She was known to throw RACHAEL big birthday parties. Never once had she been charged with assault or abuse. It was said that RACHAEL was really the controlling figure in the family. She had somehow managed to convince her parents to let her go to a special alternative school only once a week, leaving her remaining time to hang out with her boyfriend, plus allow a special overnight pass with her 21-year-old boyfriend. Okay, so Barbara isn't perfect, but it sounds like neither is RACHAEL. But by now, her relationship with teenage RACHAEL was on a steady decline. There was continual belittling, heated arguments, and Barbara was attempting to control RACHAEL at every turn. Dealing with a normal mother-daughter dynamic can be tough at times, but when you mix in the toxic personality traits the two of them displayed, it was obvious the rest of RACHAEL's teen years would be tough. Things really came to a head when now 16-year-old RACHAEL began dating Allan in May of 2006. Ian, who was 21 at the time, created issues within the Mullenix family. This must have brought up old feelings for Barbara, who, at 18, had been the victim of a sexual assault, which resulted in a baby. Maybe Barbara was fearing history would repeat itself. The age gap was a problem, but her parents eventually accepted him, going so far as to sign a permission slip stating he was allowed to date their daughter even though she was a minor. Sleepovers were also allowed. Aside from all the drama, Barbara wanted to continue living with RACHAEL after she turned 18, but feared her daughter would leave to move in with Ian. In a way to combat this fear, Barbara would reportedly try to prevent RACHAEL from seeing Ian. On August 31st, RACHAEL failed to return home at her 1 a.m. curfew. Her mother was frantic and furious, calling her daughter's cell phone. Upon receiving no reply, she then drove over to Ian's home, where she found Rachel had simply fallen asleep. Barbara dragged Rachel out of Ian's home. Not only was she grounded, she was forbidden to ever see Ian again. After this, Rachel was said to have been very embarrassed by her mother. A few days later, she gave in to her daughter's pleas and let the couple go to a movie. Some speculate that this was when the plan for the murder began to take form. An apparently smitten Ian had now decided he would do anything for Rachel. Not even 2 weeks later, on September 13th, 2006, Barbara was killed in her bedroom, a place that is supposed to be safe. It was said that this crime was a bloody one. Barbara Mullenix suffered over 50 stab wounds from 3 separate weapons, which it would later be determined were wielded by 2 assailants. Her body was wrapped in blankets, dragged from her room, down the stairs, and placed in the trunk of a car. The killers? Rachel and Ian. Rachel's story is that she tried to stop Ian from killing her mother. However, she did not attempt to fend him off. She also had no defense wounds, did not call the police, and did not alert neighbors. She simply got to work cleaning the crime scene. After cleaning, the killer couple then drove away from the crime scene and dumped Barbara's body near the yacht club in Newport Harbor. Her body was discovered, and, just like right out of a horror film, she was found with the butcher knife still in her body. With her mother now gone and the crime scene cleaned up, Rachel and Ian attempted to flee to Florida to hide out with friends. Rachel would later go on to claim that Ian had kidnapped her and she woke up bound and gagged in a motel. However, prosecutors said during their road trip, which consisted of motel and convenience store visits, she made no attempt to alert authorities, and she clearly had access to Ian's phone. The couple were arrested 2 days later in Louisiana. A trial took place and the jury decision was made. Rachel was guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life for the murder of her mother. The jury had no problem convicting them. The killer couple had left a long trail behind them, including a recording of the two discussing that the best way for them to go forward would be to plead insanity. During the trial, Ian accused Rachel of being the real mastermind of the killings, and that he had been there to assist, helping her move the body. Throughout her trial, Rachel insisted that she was innocent of the murder and that it was Ian who killed Barbara. The couple had apparently been planning on running away together, but murder was never part of the plan. Rachel described her mother as my world and my life, and said she woke with guilt in her jail cell every morning. Even though I didn't do it, she said, I feel like I didn't do enough to prevent it. Rachel's family, including her father, half-brother, and grandparents, also maintained her innocence. Her father even testified in her defense, claiming that Barbara was a completely different person when she was drunk and called her an abusive alcoholic and disciplinarian. When prosecutors asked how he felt about his ex-wife's death, Bruce replied, saying, I feel very bad. It was very hard to love her. I was glad to be divorced from her. Even with all the conflicts, I would have never wanted anything to happen to her. I'm very sorry she's dead. But he also told the judge he refused to believe his daughter was a killer. I know in my heart that she didn't do this, he said. Her mother had problems. No one knows how bad it was other than Rachel and myself. Mullenix's grandmother and grandfather broke into tears as the verdict was read. I love you, the grandfather said over the silence that filled the courtroom. Mullenix never looked back to see her family before being led away in handcuffs. She's innocent, her grandmother said as she left the courtroom. Rachel's half-brother, Alex Haygood, was interviewed regarding his mother's death and his sister's sentencing. When asked about allegations that Rachel had attempted to murder Barbara a year prior, he said he doubted that was true. "I moved in with my mother in 2003 when she lived in Oklahoma. A couple of times when I was about to leave, she self-inflicted wounds and threatened to say I did it. She chased me around with a baseball bat. Emotionally and mentally, she choked Rachel." He went on to say that he believed his sister was innocent and hoped to see her released. "If anything, Ian was the one behind planning everything. She's suffered enough. I haven't been able to hug her since 2005. No friends or family were present in court to speak on behalf of Barbara during the victim impact portion of the trial. Instead, a victim's advocate from the district attorney's office prepared a statement. Barbara Mullenix may have been far from perfect, but there is nothing that can be said about her faults that would remotely begin to justify this horrific crime. During the sentencing, the judge noted Rachel's seeming lack of remorse for her mother's death. Many said that Rachel seemed cold-hearted and narcissistic in her responses during the trial, which might explain the judge's remarks. In 2010, Rachel lost an appeal claiming prosecutorial misconduct. Today, she resides in Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla and is eligible for parole in 2027 at age 38. As for Ian, he was also sentenced to 25 years to life for his part in the crime and is incarcerated at the Chuckawalla Valley State Prison in Blythe. Rachel's father still lives in California and works for a nonprofit that creates work programs in recycling for people with disabilities. Whether or not Rachel played an active role in her mother's death is up to individual opinion. Either way, it was an unfortunate event that will surely stay burned in the memories of parents across the country. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.